After Andre Braugher passed away in December of 2023, his stately Craftsman-style home in South Pasadena sat untouched for nearly 8 months. Locals whispered about it, the way the lights would flicker on at odd hours, or how delivery workers refused to approach the porch at night. But to Brian and Samantha Elgin, the house was a dream. They were a young couple from San Diego, both in their early 30s, looking to settle down. Brian taught photography at a community college, while Samantha worked remotely in tech. They wanted a house with character, a yard for their dog Jasper, and a quiet neighborhood. When the real estate agent told them the house had belonged to some actor, they didn't think much of it. The house was a steal. From the outside, the 2-story home stood with a quiet grace, cloaked in ivy and shaded by old jacaranda trees. It had the kind of silence you only find in old neighborhoods, thick, like velvet. Inside, the floors creaked the way you'd expect from a home built before World War II. Still, everything seemed in good shape, preserved with care. There were traces of Andre everywhere. His study with built-in bookshelves still smelled faintly of cedar and cologne. The previous owners had left behind framed photos, now stacked in boxes in the attic. They featured Andre smiling at events, standing beside actors the Elgins recognized but couldn't quite name. Brian found a binder of old stage scripts. "He did Shakespeare?" he asked aloud, impressed. It wasn't until their third night that Samantha heard the low hum. It began around 3 a.m., a low, vibrating hum, like the engine of a car idling in the distance. But it wasn't outside, it came from the walls. And it stopped the moment she moved. The next night it came again. Brian chalked it up to old pipes. "These houses settle. They groan, they hum. My grandparents' house used to do that." But Samantha wasn't convinced. One night she stayed awake, phone in hand, recording the sound. What she captured was subtle, but clearly audible. A deep, sustained vibration that rose and fell like breathing. Then came the drafts, short bursts of cold air that seemed to move through the house with purpose. They didn't follow the windows or vents. They'd start at the base of the stairs, wind through the kitchen, and vanish near the back door. Jasper, their dog, became anxious. He refused to enter the study. Whenever Brian worked late at night in there, Jasper would sit at the threshold and whine, refusing to cross into the room. They brought in an HVAC inspector. Nothing unusual. They had the pipes checked. Still nothing. But Samantha knew what she felt. The house wasn't just creaky, it was occupied. The heart of the house was Andre's study. Mahogany panels, a long writing desk, a worn leather armchair. That's where things turned. Brian began working in the study more often, editing his photo projects late into the night. It was there that he first saw something move, not clearly, just a shadow crossing the glass of the French doors behind him. But when he turned, the hallway was empty. Then came the voices, soft at first, murmurs, a low male voice, always from just around the corner. Brian thought it might be the neighbor's TV, until the voice called him by name. "Brian." The syllables stretched through the air like smoke. He froze, heart pounding. He turned off the desk lamp and stood in the dark, but nothing else came. A few days later, Samantha found a book on the study floor. One of the old scripts, Coriolanus. The script was open to a page Andre had apparently marked. Passage circled in red. "If you have writ your annals true, 'tis there, that like an eagle in a dovecot I fluttered your volscians in Corioli." That night, Brian dreamed of a man standing over him, whispering those very words. They began researching. The house had been Andre Braugher's for over 15 years. He'd done interviews from the den, hosted cast dinners in the backyard. It was, by all accounts, his sanctuary. But in his later years, neighbors claimed he kept to himself. One mentioned Andre often walked the house at night, muttering lines. Preparing for roles, he'd say. Another neighbor said Andre once confided in him that the house didn't feel empty even when he was alone. Samantha reached out to a medium, not one of those TV psychics, but a retired nurse who quietly did readings. Her name was Carla. The moment Carla entered the study, her expression changed. She asked them to be quiet. Then she said softly, "He loved this house. He worked hard here. But he didn't leave. Carla insisted it wasn't malevolent. He's watching. He thinks it's still his space. You moved in, but he hasn't moved on. After Carla's visit, things shifted. The house grew quieter, but only if they respected the study. Brian stopped working in there late. They left Andre's chair and books untouched. Oddly, the house felt less hostile. The hums returned only now and then, as if checking in. Sometimes Brian still heard his name, but it didn't chill him like before. Samantha lit a candle every week and placed it on the study's mantel. She started calling it Mr. Braugher's room. It became a quiet pact between the living and the dead. Friends who visited said the place had an old soul feel. They never stayed long. And sometimes, when Brian worked late editing photos in the kitchen, he'd glance at the hallway and swear he saw someone standing in the dark, shoulders squared, arms behind his back, like a stage actor waiting for his cue. But he never spoke of it again. They stayed. And the house stayed too, waiting for its next scene. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. It was mid-February when the rain finally came. Not the soft California drizzle that lingered and evaporated before touching your skin, but real rain. Heavy, metallic, alive. The sky turned the color of wet slate, and the jacaranda branches, slick and swaying, scratched against the windows in slow, deliberate strokes. Brian sat at the kitchen table editing photos on his laptop, the glow from the screen casting pale light across his face. Jasper lay at his feet, unmoving, chin flat against the tile, ears twitching every few seconds at the sound of water trickling down the gutters. Then the power cut out, not with a dramatic snap, but rather a slow, wavering flicker. First the kitchen lights dimmed, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Then the fridge gave a low groan, and the screen of Brian's laptop blinked twice before giving up. He exhaled and stood, rubbing the back of his neck. "Fuse box," he muttered, grabbing his phone. The flashlight flicked on, casting a narrow beam ahead of him. As he stepped into the hallway, the floorboards shifted beneath his weight. The kind of shift that doesn't come from wood expanding but from weight redistributing. It felt like someone had just stepped off a stair behind him. Brian turned fast, just darkness and the shape of the kitchen arch behind him. Jasper hadn't moved. The hallway was long and narrow, with closed doors on either side. One of them, the old linen closet across from the guest room, had been sealed since the day they moved in. It had no keyhole, just a brass handle that wouldn't turn. Every time they tried to open it, the door resisted solid, jammed, like something was leaning against it from the inside. But now, as Brian passed it with the light from his phone trailing across the wood grain, he noticed something different. A line of water. It started at the base of the door, glistening like ink, and stretched outward across the hardwood floor in a lazy trail. Not a leak, there were no pipes behind the wall there. It looked intentional, like a brushstroke from a wet hand. Brian's fingers trembled as he brought the light higher. The doorknob, unmoved since August, was now wet. It glistened with condensation. And faintly, so faintly he wondered if it was in his head, he heard humming. Low, resonant, familiar. The same hum Samantha had recorded weeks ago. But now it had melody. It was tuned, like someone practicing a single note, again and again, from deep within the walls. Samantha hadn't told Brian about the dreams. Not all of them. They began in winter. She would wake in the early morning hours, her hair damp at the temples, lips dry, heart thudding as if she'd been running. The dreams were always the same: shadowed hallways, a quiet audience, and a man speaking in soliloquy from behind a curtain she could never pull back. In one of the dreams, she stood barefoot in the backyard, which was flooded in moonlight. The windows of the house glowed a dim orange, flickering as if by candlelight, though they'd installed LEDs everywhere. In the dream, she felt something behind her. Not a hand, not a presence, just the weight of a stare. A stare with weight is a strange thing to describe, but she felt it pressing between her shoulder blades, as if asking her silently not to turn around. When she did anyway, the yard was empty, but a voice echoed from inside the house. "I'm still working." She woke up gasping. On one particularly cold night, Samantha found herself standing at the foot of the study's doorway. In her sleep, her bare feet chilled against the floor, arms hanging loosely at her sides. The door was open. She didn't remember walking there. She had no memory of getting out of bed. But she remembered the smell cologne and old paper. The study lights were off, but moonlight slid in through the high window above the desk, illuminating the empty chair. Only it wasn't empty. Just for a second, maybe less, she saw the back of a man's head. Broad shoulders, perfect posture. He was sitting at the desk, one hand resting on the script laid out before him. She blinked. Gone. Brian had always been curious about the cardboard boxes in the attic. They were heavy, full of binders and VHS tapes, some labeled in marker, others left blank. One Saturday afternoon, as Samantha took a nap and rain dotted the skylight above their bedroom, he brought down a few of them. He hooked up the old combo player they found at a thrift store, one of the ones that played VHS and DVD. It was temperamental, buzzing and vibrating on startup, but eventually the screen cleared. The tape was labeled in faded black ink, SPC Theater Tempest, 2002. He hit play. Andre appeared younger, still carrying the gravity of age in his voice. He was standing center stage, reciting Prospero with startling intensity. The crowd was silent, transfixed. Brian leaned forward. He could feel the weight of the man's performance even through the grainy tape. At the end of the monologue, the camera held unsteadily in someone's hands panned over the stage and then quickly down into the crowd. There, in the shadows, something strange happened. For a frame, maybe two, a figure appeared in the audience. Not seated, but standing. Still, dressed in black. The face was blurred, but something about the stance, it mimicked Andre's. The same tilt of the head, the same bearing. Brian rewound, froze it. But when he paused the frame, the standing figure was gone. He tried again. Still gone. He turned the TV off, heart thumping. From the hallway, behind the couch, a voice hummed. March brought with it a warm, golden hush that hung over South Pasadena like a blanket. The rains had passed, and the heavy blooms on the jacaranda trees outside the house cast purple shadows on the sidewalk. But inside the house, something had shifted again. There was a growing quiet, not peace, but expectation, as though the house itself had begun holding its breath. Samantha noticed it first in the air, not in the temperature or scent, but in the density. The way it wrapped around her shoulders when she walked down the hall toward the study. The way it pressed against her chest when she stood on the staircase and stared at the landing. Her eyes instinctively avoiding the linen closet door, which now always seemed slightly ajar, no matter how firmly they closed it. She had begun to avoid mirrors after dusk. In the bathroom, after brushing her teeth, she would glance up and see herself, but not quite herself. Her reflection stood still, unmoving, sometimes just a heartbeat out of sync. Sometimes its mouth twitched before hers did. She said nothing to Brian. He too had changed. He had grown quieter, more distracted. He sat up late in the dining room with old tapes scattered around him, scribbling notes, cross-referencing pieces of Andre's performances like a scholar tracing sacred scripture. Sometimes, she would find him speaking softly to himself in the same cadence Braugher used in The Tempest, or quoting monologues without realizing it. His voice would drop in pitch when he did it. He wouldn't blink. One night, as she passed the open dining room door on her way to bed, she paused and watched him. He was sitting completely still in a wooden chair, arms folded in his lap, eyes locked on the blank television screen. It was turned off. There was no tape playing. The room was dark except for the low light of the porch bulb leaking through the front windows. Brian didn't notice her. His mouth moved. "This island's mine, by Sycorax my mother, which thou taxed from me." It wasn't his voice. The following evening, Samantha decided to confront the energy that had coiled itself into the bones of the house. She waited until just after midnight, when Brian was asleep and the sky outside the bedroom window was clear and ink-black. She made her way down the creaking stairs, each one groaning under her step as if protesting her decision. She passed the kitchen without turning on a light. Jasper, who usually followed her down at night, stayed in bed, his ears flat, tail tucked. The study door was open. She entered, barefoot and in silence. The room was cold, but not unwelcoming. The air had that strange, dense weight again, like being underwater. She could hear her own heartbeat loud, resonant, and echoing strangely in her chest. She sat in the leather chair, the one no one had sat in since they moved in. It groaned under her weight like it remembered something. On the desk before her were the usual things: the old brass lamp with the green glass shade, a stack of yellowed scripts, a half-burned candle in a glass holder they never lit. But now there was a photo, one she had never seen before. It was black and white, a candid shot, seemingly taken from the side. Andre, mid-laugh, his hand clutching a script, surrounded by empty chairs. He looked relaxed, free. His eyes sparkled in the photograph in a way that unnerved her. They almost seemed wet, like the photograph was alive. Behind him, in the shadows near the edge of the frame, was a tall dark figure, just a blur, no face, no lines, just a shape. Watching him, watching her now. She looked away. When she looked back, the photograph was gone. The candle flickered to life. The light didn't come from a match or her hand, or anything physical. It simply was a quiet, steady glow, flickering gently as if breathing. She didn't run. Samantha sat back in the chair and let the silence fill the room. And then she heard it. Footsteps above her. Slow, deliberate. They moved across the ceiling, then stopped right above the study. The attic. The footsteps resumed, crossing toward the attic stairs near the back of the hallway. Then down. Slowly. One step at a time. Brian awoke in a sweat. His dreams had been thick, layered, like onion skin peeling back to reveal memory that wasn't his. He dreamt of stage lights, of a packed house, of silence so pure it could break. He had been speaking in the dream, though his mouth did not move. The words came from his chest, deep and urgent. "We are such stuff as dreams are made on." He sat up and listened. The house wasn't quiet. It was breathing. He heard Samantha's voice. Not words, just a low whisper, carried on the air. Came from the study. He stood, walked downstairs slowly. The moment he turned the corner and the study came into view, the candlelight inside seemed to pulse. Samantha was sitting in the chair, her eyes open, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her lips were moving. Her voice was soft. She was reciting something. "And our little life is rounded with a sleep." But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the space in front of the desk. Not the bookshelf, not the lamp. She was looking at someone. Brian stepped into the room. He felt it like crossing a barrier. The pressure shifted. His ears popped, faintly, as if he'd gone underwater. And then there was a presence. He didn't see him, but he knew. Andre was here, in the room, not as a ghost, not as something lost, but as something in rehearsal. He had never left. Samantha stopped speaking. She turned her eyes to Brian and whispered, "He wants us to stay." The house stood in stillness for 3 full days after that night. The kind of stillness that sits in the bones of old wood and hums in the walls like a slow and deliberate exhale. Something had passed a threshold, a moment, a curtain torn. Samantha and Brian both felt it, but neither spoke of it directly. They went about their days like people who had survived a fire that no one else had seen. Their eyes met more often. Their silences grew longer. At night, they slept closer, bodies touching, as if trying to remain tethered to the here and now. And yet, there was no fear, just a sense of permission. The house had accepted them, but it had also given them a role to play. It began on a Sunday. A light rain patterned against the tall living room windows, soft and even. Samantha stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring out toward the backyard, where wet branches stirred with unseen rhythm. Brian was upstairs, sorting through the last of the tapes. Something compelled him, some lingering instinct to catalog them, to understand. And then he heard it again. A voice, clear, measured, powerful, coming from below. He moved quietly down the stairs, one hand brushing the banister, ears tuned sharply to every word. Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves. The voice came not from a speaker, not from any recording. Came from the study, And ye that on the sands with printless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune. The words of the Tempest, Act V. The final monologue of Prospero. Graves at my command have waked their sleepers, op-ed, and let 'em forth. As Brian stepped into the room, the air shifted again, warmer now, denser, like a full auditorium. Samantha stood beside the desk, not moving, her face washed in candlelight. The chair was empty, but he felt him, Andre, present, alive, not flesh and blood, but voice and breath and intention. Not a ghost clinging to the past, but an actor reclaiming his final bow. And then came silence, a silence so thick it pressed into the ears like water. The candle flickered once, then went out. The photograph on the desk was gone. In its place was a folded page from a script. The same monologue, typed, with faint pencil marks in the margins. And at the bottom, just beneath the final line, in deep blue ink, a single note. This is enough. Thank you. The Elgins stayed in the house. The strange cold spots vanished. The humming ceased. The linen closet, one afternoon in April, simply opened on its own with a low click. Inside, shelves, towels, a half-used bottle of lavender linen spray. Nothing unusual, but they never closed it again. Brian went on to produce a small local documentary, The House at the Edge of the Stage, about Andre's career, blending interviews, voiceover, and selections from the tapes he had recovered. It gained quiet acclaim online. Samantha began writing again. Short pieces, essays, reflections on liminal spaces. She always started her writing in the study, in the morning light, never moving the old leather chair. And sometimes, when the house is particularly quiet, with the breeze pushing gently through the open windows and the scent of jacaranda heavy in the air, they both feel it. That faint presence, not haunting, not burdened, just watching, listening, rehearsing. Not every spirit lingers out of sorrow. Some remain out of love. And Andre, he had simply never finished his final scene. Now, at last, he had. The curtain had fallen. And the house, still echoing faintly with his voice, was finally at peace. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.